I can talk a little bit about how some of these models work, specifically ChatGPT and other so-called large language models. If you've ever used one, you know that you type some text and then you get a response, and it's kind of surprising, shocking how well it can respond. Of course, it also makes a lot of mistakes, so-called hallucinations, where it just makes up things that aren't real. And so there's a question of why it does this, how does it work under the hood? ChatGPT and all these large language models are massive neural networks. They're a particular type of neural network architecture known as a transformer architecture. Basically, a transformer takes a bunch of input text, turns it into little tokens, puts those tokens into this sort of latent space that we talked about before, so it just represents them as lists of numbers, and puts that information through neural networks. Now, it has a clever mechanism called an attention mechanism where it can pick and choose which parts of the previous input to pay attention to. And that's really the key to why they are so successful, because it can understand some context and know that, oh, of this massive amount of text I've read, here are the important parts. But then what it does with all that information is it just tries to predict the next word. And then it looks back at everything else and predicts the next word after that, and the next word after that. And of course, it does it a certain number of times so that the output is, paragraphs, sentences, whatever. But to some extent, it's really just like a super fancy predictive text algorithm. And some individuals who want us to avoid, overstating the power of these algorithms have derisively referred to them as stochastic parrots. Stochasticity basically means randomness, and so a parrot just repeats, what it's heard, right? And so a stochastic parrot is a parrot that just randomly spits back things it's heard before in a way that is plausible. I mean, the fact that this is trained on, real sentences written by people on the internet means it knows the most likely word that should follow some other word, and that certain words are unlikely. So it'll seldom have ungrammatical sentences unless it's prompted in a very specific way that kind of encourages that. It will try to match the style that fits the context of what you're asking for. But it arguably can't create anything new. It can combine things it's seen before in interesting ways. It can be thought of as a very, easy to use, fancy information retrieval mechanism, because it's trained on so much data that in theory is somewhere embedded within the trained parameters. So it's like somehow, if it's seen something before, it hopefully remembers it. And there's maybe, some argument that it can occasionally do new computations. So it might see certain types of problems being solved often enough that it can solve similar problems sort of by analogy, just doing a similar process, and goes, okay, well, these steps solve this problem, these steps solve this one. And if there's enough training examples of that, it'll be able to recreate that. But there's no guarantee it'll be correct every time. And there's plenty of examples of it being wrong. And ChatGPT in particular has an additional level of training on top of it via reinforcement learning with human feedback. So reinforcement learning, another topic I touch on in my AI class, and that comes out of sort of psychology, is this idea that you can train an agent to improve its behavior by rewarding and punishing it. So when it does something good, you give it a little bit of reward. When it does something bad, you give it a punishment, which is just a reward with a negative sign in front of it. Everything's a number in a computer. And this can be done to train agents to, play Pac-Man, play various video games, or it can train a robot to, clean a room. People have used reinforcement learning to help control how elevators in a skyscraper behave. So it can do a lot of things. And this is also predominantly powered by neural networks. That's what deep reinforcement learning is. Deep learning is the use of neural networks that are really, really deep. They have lots of layers. Deep reinforcement learning is, let's use those neural networks to do reinforcement learning, and the transformer architecture is a very deep neural network. What is reinforcement learning with human feedback? Well, they had people interact with their GPT models, and humans would sort of rate the quality of the responses. Except humans aren't experts on everything. And so what the training seems to have done is mainly encourage these models to be very good liars, or be good at making stuff up that sounds plausible. Because if you ask it a question and it gives you a plausible sounding response, you may say, "Oh yeah, sounds good." Whereas if you are an expert in that narrow topic that you asked about, you might realize, "Oh, this is factually wrong. Like this, seems very accurate, but it's not true. It's a hallucination." So we so-called hallucination, and that explains a little bit why some work is still needed to make sure these models tell the truth and support what their claims and give you accurate information. I love AI because it touches on various areas of knowledge. It touches on psychology through reinforcement learning. My evolutionary computation research pulls a lot of ideas from biology, and a lot of AI work touches on neuroscience, which is sort of a subfield of psychology. And so we're thinking about what's possible, and so that's even getting into the realm of philosophy. Is it possible to make an artificially intelligent agent that can truly recreate what humans can do? I definitely don't think we're there yet with ChatGPT or any of these large language models. I'm skeptical that will be the ultimate route to a so-called artificial general intelligence. It might take new breakthroughs we haven't encountered yet, if it's even possible, but we'll have to wait and see. But what I do know is that these models that exist now and their successors are going to be part of our world. Everyone's going to be using them in the workforce. There is risk and concern that they'll be replacing people, they'll be replacing jobs, and although that will probably happen to some extent, I still think that humans are fundamentally capable of things that these models can't do, and that ultimately it'll be up to us to use them as tools to be more efficient, and to know when they're hallucinating, when they're lying, so that we can have sort of a human filter on this GPT output that is just, processing so much of the internet in ways we can't fully understand or appreciate. But regardless, we're going to be looking for ways to, make society work with these models, looking for ways to better teach students both how to learn in a world where these models exist, how to use them in ethical ways to learn well, how to improve on them and be superior to them in ways that currently only humans can do. And hopefully we'll all eventually reach a point where we can, make use of these and also, come to terms in a society that relies to some extent on this latest advance in AI.